Hello and good evening, everyone. And thank you for being here with us today to our third TICC.TALK. And we are very proud again to host another famous, impactful, and also inspiring keynote speaker, Markus Miele. But before we get started, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues who make this event possible, especially Madeleine and Janina, who make all of this happen in the background. Also Sven and Christoph and my colleagues who help build, operate and grow our institute. And today a special guest also Matthias Waldkirch, who is joining us today for the TICC.TALK. And he's an assistant professor of entrepreneurship and innovation in family-owned firms. He's also heading the Entrepreneurship and Family Firm Institute, the so-called EFI. And this is why we thought he's the perfect person to support us today for this TICC.TALK. My name is Toby. I'm Tobias Gutmann, assistant professor here at EBS. And together with Sven Henkel and Christoph Schneider and many colleagues, professors, PhD students, we're building the TICC, the Institute for Technology, for Innovation and Customer Centricity. I'm also head of the Siemens Product Innovation Lab. This is kind of a center that we have, which centers around how to build market relevant, sustainable products. And we partner with a lot of different organizations, but today a big shout out goes to our biggest partner, Siemens Advanta Consulting, which is the management consultancy firm of Siemens. Short info about our institute at the TICC. So there are many topics which are interesting for us, where we conduct research, where we teach students and executives or help our partners. For example, consumer behavior, co-creation, digital entrepreneurship, corporate venturing, and so on. And we build on 3 pillars. So the first one is customer insight. We want to understand how people think, feel, and act. Next step is, out of those customer insights, we want to create meaningful innovations. So how can we build new products, new solutions, new services? And then, of course, we take into account the third pillar, the whole transformation and organizational aspect, to really kind of have a fully fledged digital transformation. With this short introductory round, I hand over to Matthias, who is introducing you to kind of the EFI and our Family Firm Institute.
Thank you so much, Tobias. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially to have all of you as guests today, and especially, of course, Markus Miele here as our keynote speaker today. So while Tobias is kind of covering a little bit more the technology and customer centricity side, we're really covering, in a sense, what the family firm is all about. So the entrepreneurship part, being able to renew a business such as Miele over 120 years, and understanding how companies and owner families are actually doing this, while at the same time also focusing on responsible ownership as a core aspect of what makes family firms especially what they are. And lastly, we're of course interested in understanding new work and how companies adopt to the zeitgeist over time and bring in new aspects and innovate so that they're still relevant after 120 years. So again, it's an absolute pleasure to have you all here this evening. And let me very quickly and shortly introduce Markus Miele, because I really do not want to take any minute more than necessary away from his talk. So Markus Miele, an absolute pleasure having you here. Coming from originally as an industrial engineer from Karlsruhe, afterwards with a PhD in business administration in St. Gallen, and with a short stint at Hella since 1999, a part of Miele. And since 2002, you're actually leading the business as one of the managing directors, especially together with Christian Zinkern, because Miele is, as maybe not all of you know, not just the Miele family, but also the Zinkern family. So most of the ownership is still in family hands, shared between those 2 families that have been building Miele and keeping Miele alive, and not just alive, but thriving over the last 120 years. So Markus Miele, you've been a great leader in this company, bringing Miele fully into the 21st century by driving sustainability and also digitalization within the company, from new things such as the Generation 7000, Captain Cook as a new app that's really integrated within what you're doing, to the steam ovens that we've discussed last Friday. There's a lot of things and very exciting things that Miele is doing, and especially how your company manages to be so innovative on the one hand, while still retaining its core and building on what made you strong all those years ago, is, I think, a really, really interesting topic here, and allows for really great insights and learning for all of us on how to innovate in a sustainable manner, and also innovate over time. And how you actually manage all of this, I think that's really best for you to tell us. So I'm passing on the ball to you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. So I think now it's your.
So thank you very much, Mr. Waldkirch, for the kind introduction. First of all, as I heard, it's the third TICC talk in East Westphalia. We have a saying that 3 times means it's a tradition. So I'm now building on a tradition. That's great. Super. I like that. And you have given me an, I would say, almost impossible task. When the first Secretary General of the United Nations handed it out to the second one, he said, "Congratulations to the most impossible job on earth." Now you urge me to give a few aspects about Miele in 15 to 20 minutes, when normally I would like to talk about hours and hours and hours. But you know, the weather here in East Westphalia is quite nice. Maybe you have also something else to do. So I try to cut it really, really short. So it's only the highlights of the highlights. And of course, then I'm happy to take your questions, whatever you have on mind. Hopefully I can answer them. But first, some facts, some charts about Miele. And I try to deep dive in the one or the other story, because stories typically you remember quite well. And next time, I don't know if you have a failing kitchen appliance, think of us. So let's start the presentation. And let's go for the TICC talk. So first of all, of course, I have to talk a little bit about Miele. Mr. Waldkirch already said it, more than 120 years. Actually, Miele was founded by my great-grandfather, Karl Miele, and his partner, Reinhard Zinkern. And Karl Miele was actually living on a farm and saw how difficult it was to make butter. The former butter churns were, you will see a picture later, a wooden tub and something moving inside. And actually 2 years later, already they had their first washing machine, which was not a machine like we know it today, but more maybe a washing device. We were founded in Herzeburg, but that's very close to Gütersloh, and we have a railway connection here in Gütersloh. That's why they moved in 1907 to Gütersloh, and this is where I am today. It is a family company of these 2 families. We have a little bit more than 90 shareholders. Generation number 3, a lot in generation number 4, but also already some of generation number 5. What is not so typical is that we are completely self-financed, meaning that we don't have bank debts, but we have everything that we need to fund already earned before. That's nice, but also puts pressure on you, because then you are really, really responsible for the outcome. Now, just to give an indication about numbers, the last year, 2020, of course, influenced by Corona, but we did a turnover of 4.5 billion euros. That's an increase of 6.5%. And Corona has also hit us, but it's a two-sided answer, I would say. One was that we also had a shutdown in some of our factories, but on the other side, people are now investing more into their home. And the second half of the year was already a great ending of the year. And this is why we could increase the turnover. We have a little bit more than 20,000 employees. More or less half is in Germany, half is outside Germany. We have factories outside, but mostly sales subsidiaries. And if you divide the 4.5 billion euros, 30% is Germany and 70% is outside Germany. Now, the management board, And you also mentioned the Zinkan family. So we have 2 board members that are actually representatives of the 2 families. That's Reinhard Zinkan and that's me. And we have 3 non-family members, and I'm working on the board together with Stefan Breit, more on the technical side. Reinhard Zinkan is working with Axel Kniel on sales and marketing. And then we have Olaf Bartsch, who is doing finance, administration, and what we call Hauptverwaltung. Now, one thing is special about Miele, because we are already 120 years together with the Zinkan, so we found a way how we can try to solve maybe difficult situations. So although Miele has the majority, we have a special treaty that we say we need at least 60% with the big decisions. That means we have to take also the other family and vice versa with us. That leads in a lot of discussion beforehand, but when we decide, we can go ahead. And that's, of course, very, very helpful when you have such a long tradition. Now, when you think of Miele, what do you think of in terms of products? It's, of course, laundry care, washing machines, tumble dryers. But we also do a lot of kitchen appliances, from steamers, ovens, cooktops, hoods, hobs, dishwashers, of course. A little bit less known is professional. A little bit more than 10% is our professional business. That means we have larger washers and dryers for applications in hotels, in restaurants. That's not a business that's running very well right now, I have to say. Floor care, doing extremely well. And the last part is service. That means our own service technicians and the accessories. Now, when I say Miele, and I have a little bit my own market research, whenever I am entering new countries, then at immigration, I ask, do you know the brand? And typically, people would say laundry care in Germany. When you go to Australia, I've already heard that, oh, the oven company, because we are much more successful with ovens. Last time in the US, that's more than 2 years ago, I have to say, was the floor care company, vacuums. So it doesn't necessarily mean that when you know Miele as a washing machine company, that everybody knows that as a washing machine company. So the next thing when you think about Miele is quality. So we have long-lasting machines. And I just wanted to give you a small insight into our lab, where we test, for example, our washing machines to run 5,000 cycles. That's 10,000 hours. And we do that with washing machines from series production, but also prototypes from the development. And they have to surpass these 10,000 hours in order that they can be integrated. So where does this come from? Where does this quality come from? And actually, I was talking about the butter churns, and Carl Miele was living on a farm, as I said, was experiencing that they broke down quite frequently. And they said, we can do a better product, but we also have to show it to the outside. And this is why Carl Miele and his partner coined the phrase immer besser, forever better, if you translate it word by word, meaning that we have an inner desire to improve our products, but it's not only products, it's also ourselves, it's the processes and so on. So this is what's driving us. And just to give you a little glimpse there, we have not always only done washing devices. When you go to our museum, we were quite innovative between 1912 and 1914, because we also did cars. We are one of the German car manufacturers. We stopped that, fortunately, because it was the decision, where do we want to go? And luckily, I can say that our forefathers decided to stick with the washing machines, because we are still around. With an automotive brand, I don't know if we were still around. But this is just to show that we were also innovative in the beginning. Now, let's talk a little bit about innovation. And I want to give you a few cases with a few different angles. Now, this is the dialogue oven, which we introduced 4 years ago. And it actually can cook a fish in ice. Now, we have shown that at one IFA, and the picture you see on the left is actually from the front page of FAZ, which is one of the big newspapers in Germany. And people were so fascinated that we were really on the outset of what could be developed within an oven. And just to give you a small story to that, actually the technology comes from medicine. And the company we partnered with, it's an Israeli company, they were looking actually for a process that could heat things like liver, but also heart, when you want to transplant that completely evenly. Because typically, and that's also what happens today, you take out organs and then you cool them down, you transport them, and then you have to reheat them. And how do you do that today? You do that like you melt chocolate in a water bath, and you do that also today. And they were looking for a different technology. They found different electromagnetic waves that could go through. And actually, one of the super interesting things is that they can also heat the fish in ice, which we showed, and that was a big success at one of the IFAs. So we can do technical innovation, and I think we can do that quite well. We've seen now a good reception of the product, but it's not only about technical innovation. It's also about listening to your consumer. And I wanted to dive down a little bit this road. We actually have now washing machines that do the dosage completely by itself. And how do we come about to do this? You see on the left side, we had detergent. And how did we come to the idea to sell detergent? There were two streams that were more or less parallel. In the US, we were selling our machines. And in the US, the chemistry of detergents, it's mostly based on chlorine and not on oxygen, what we have. So we said we'd rather import German detergent, what we did quite successfully, I have to say. And so we ventured out a little bit into the chemistry world, did our own formulation. And in the same time, we had, let's call it a not so well performing detergent here on the market. One of the real cheap detergents, and that was also not performing well. And our service technicians came back to us saying, you know, we have a lot of customers that have problems with this detergent. What do we recommend? Do we recommend the test winner of Stiftung Warentest, the most known brand, and so on? And we said, in order not to evade anyone, we will create our own detergent. This is what you see with ultra white and ultra color. Of course, then you think the next step, how can you make it more convenient? So we had a dosage system. At first, it was put on top, and it was quite successful. So the next step was, because we know what the customer puts into the washing machine, and then they select, of course, the program, whether it's cotton or synthetics or whatever. So we know the kind of textile, we measure how much is inside. So we say, we can actually do the perfect dosage whenever we want to do it. Now we have two detergents. One is more for the stains that are based on fat, and the other one is more for bleaching. And we do the dosage at the perfect timing with the perfect temperature. And now it's very, very convenient. You just have to change the cartridges from time to time, and that's that. And we solve the problem also of overdosing. By the way, most of the people are overdosing a little bit. A little bit is okay, but if it's more than 50, 80%, so if you go to 200%, then it's actually the other way around, that you get a worse washing result. So always try to read the instructions or buy a Miele machine. This is always around the core. You've seen the technical innovation, the consumer-driven innovation was already mentioned in the beginning. We have also innovation beyond the core, and we invested quite successfully in some startups. MChef is a startup that's directly connected to the dialogue oven. So you can prepare food and you have a restaurant-like quality at home. Otto Wilde is a grill manufacturer, premium grill manufacturer, and Captain Cook provides the recipes. One of the most famous apps here in Germany. And the interesting thing is, of course, it's always around a little bit our core business. So if you're in the kitchen and you have the dishwasher, you have storage with the fridge, then it also makes sense, of course, to come up with recipes. Agrilution, by the way, is a startup that actually sells devices where you can grow your own seeds, like basil, but microgreens and so on. And you can grow that at home, which means that's super fresh because most of the plants keep their vitamins not very long. So once you cut them, you should immediately consume them, then you get most of the nutritions. This is already partly digital, you could say. It's with Otto Wilde and M-Chef Agrilution, you still have devices, you have machines. Captain Cook is more or less a complete digital case. And where do we invent those cases? We have a group that's called Smart Home. And that's actually, it's mostly young people, younger than me typically. And they think of digital solutions, digital applications. How can we enhance also our universe of Miele products beyond what is the typical machine? And we have some very interesting use cases already developed. Some are out on the market. Some are still in the development phase. But that's a little bit moving innovation also further than just the core we have. Now, there's one last topic I want to talk about before we can go to the questions. Miele, and I started with the quality, is known for quality, and long-lasting appliances also mean that people don't have to throw away so many old appliances after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but they can enjoy them very long. So Miele is known for sustainability because they have long-lasting products, but actually since the beginning, because the first butter churns were already longer lasting butter churns, and by the way, a higher price, sounds like the same we have today. And since also the early 70s, we did a production recording of everything we consume and so on. We actually won the German Sustainability Award in 2014. Interestingly, a small side note, I got some compliments from colleagues saying, you know, you entered the competition once and you already won it. I know that some of the big companies enter twice, 3, or even 5 times to win the Sustainability Award. So there's something we're doing right, but we are completely convinced that this is only one step. And we introduced a new sustainability program this year. And we involved more than 100 people because we said we want to be recognized as the most sustainable company in our industry. And we have long-lasting products, but that's not enough. People demand more, customers demand more, and it's more than consuming energy, and it's more than sustainable packaging. And that's why we said, okay, we want to involve a lot of people of Miele to come up with great ideas. And right now we're clustering the ideas in connection to CO2 consumption. That will be the measurement, and see, you know, how can we reduce CO2 consumption? And there are, for me, 3 groups. One is very easy. For example, sending out an email to all employees that they switch off their lights during the breaks. These are things that are really easy, and then you save already money. Group 2 is you need an investment, and then it's always a calculation. As a family company, when you look long-term, then you're likely maybe to invest a little bit more because you say we will be here also in 10 years, 20 or 30 years. And number 3 is really, really hard when you have to redo complete processes and so on. One of the big CO2 consumptions is steel in our products. So to have CO2-free steel, and that's possible with hydrogen, but that's a big, big topic right now. So hopefully you have now been in the helicopter, having heard some things about Miele, and I could just give you a glimpse of what we are doing right now, but hopefully I pulled some strings to have some interesting questions. And of course, I'm now super happy to take your questions. And yes, I'm in time. That's great. Thanks very much for listening.
This is the moment where usually we would have a big round of applause, which we now have as small kind of signs popping up on the right side. So wonderful, super, super interesting, and so many points where we could talk about. I think you're absolutely right. We probably need this on a weekly basis to even start capturing the richness of all of what you've been telling us. I think I would love to start at the end of your presentation, and that's the question of sustainability. So when you look at the timeline, I mean, sustainability was always somehow implicitly built in your company with the quality and the long lastingness of this. But yet we've seen really a rise over the past 10, 15 years at that. So probably it really has something to do with your own values there as well. So how difficult was it, in a sense, to bring sustainability more to the forefront at Miele? Because right now, I mean, it's a big trend, but 15 years ago, it really was not yet. So how difficult was it for you in introducing this?
Yeah, interestingly, we had a great precondition because we have long-lasting products. That's great. And by the way, when you look at the test institutes like Stiftung Warentest, they typically test for 5 to 8 years. And we have much longer lasting appliances that you don't read in the test because they at some point in time stop the test, of course. So with a family company and a long horizon, you have the perfect precondition. Now, when you ask our employees about sustainability, they are also quite happy to participate because they say, you know, this is the heart of what we have been doing for 120 years, building great products that last long and so save water and energy. We have to be always on the forefront there. But because we use less resources in 20 years, you just need one machine probably, then this is also great for the environment. And we have also taken into account these things. If you have long-lasting appliances, you need to look at repairability, you need to look at packaging and so on. But in the last 15 years, and especially I would say the last 3 to 5 years, the consumers have been becoming much more demanding. They ask more questions about sustainability. They complain more frequently about packaging like styrofoam. Why can't you use any other material and so on? So it's something coming from within us, but it's also something coming from the consumers. And never underestimate that when a consumer writes. By the way, when I get a letter, I typically read that. I do not answer all the letters, of course, but I want to know what consumers are thinking. And you bet I have seen a lot of photos of consumers sending me things about styrofoam, for example, packaging, but also questions about energy consumption. Can't you do better? And so on. So it's not only us, it's also the consumers that are demanding. And these are the two matching processes, I would say.
Absolutely. So I think you already mentioned a really interesting part, and that's in the sense how ingrained this was. So it wasn't a huge leap for you to basically say, okay, sustainability has always been part, and maybe we never called it sustainability, but it's been part of what drove us and what we were doing. And that brings me to the question a little bit of the main topic of this talk, and that is tradition and innovation, right? So when we see the two words, it feels sometimes a little bit like a dichotomy. So either you're traditional or you're innovative, but I think this already shows that it's a little bit different here. So how do you, as a managing director and owner of this business, actually utilize tradition for driving innovation? How do you manage to do this?
I mean, I was lucky when I joined the company. This immer besser was already there. So this was something I didn't have to invent. That was my great-grandfather. So thanks to him. But this was ingrained, I would say, in every one of us at Miele, and people were living this immer besser. So now the question is, how do you interpret immer besser. And when you think of tradition, for me, it's like a platform where you start from, and you have to take it to different directions, different levels in different times. So now, as people are more asking about sustainability, of course, we have to look more at sustainability and think, how can we develop this further? How can we save energy here? Do we have a smart idea on this? How can we use this a little bit less? And just to give you an example, it is not only one-dimensional, but in Australia, people are concentrating on water, not so much electricity. In Europe, it's a little bit more electricity and less water, and you have to find solutions for all of your customers, which is demanding at once, but that's great. And as a family company, because we are able also to invest long-term, sometimes we can do some investments other companies wouldn't necessarily do, because they said, okay, the typical tenure of a CEO might be less than the ROI of the investment. Hopefully, I will be here for some years, so I can also see the effects of my own decisions.
I want to come back to this point, but I have one more question in between, a little bit on the tradition. If your great-grandfather would come in today into Miele and walk into your company, what would he still recognize of this firm after basically 120 years? What would be points where he would say, this is the company that I founded? What would you say?
My great-grandfather would probably recognize the buildings, because some of the buildings are from very early, from 1910, 1912. But everything inside has completely changed. So he wouldn't recognize the products, nor would he recognize the people, of course, and so on. I think maybe he would love to go into the museum, because there he would find some products he has sold. Maybe that would be the most interesting thing. But, you know, as an entrepreneur, you are also happy when the company grows. And hopefully he would be super happy to see that the company has grown and what Miele has become during those 120 years.
I'm pretty sure he would be quite excited about the products, the size, and the internationality to which you developed over that time. Now, you mentioned something that's quite unique about family firms, and that's the horizon to which you can plan, both looking backward. I mean, there are not that many firms that can look on 121 years of development, but also the kind of calmness to look forward and to say, okay, I mean, this year is important, next year as well, but we also care what happens in a decade from now on. And I can afford to care about this. Now, obviously, since we all do have a household at home, I'm wondering a little bit, since you are obviously looking forward in the future, could you give us a glimpse into how you would see maybe our household developing in 2030? Let's stick to a decade, and what the role of Miele is by then. Obviously, we'll still all buy Miele applications, but how do you imagine Miele to function at that time?
So hopefully, of course, we will have grown to a different size by then. With the products, we will be probably still around the kitchen and washing and drying. There will be more convenience added. It's a little bit the same story like with the detergent. We try to take the burden of deciding away from you and try to make it a little bit easier by taking into account what can be automized when we introduce different sensors and so on. So that will be one of the roads to go to or to go down. Also, when you look at electronic controls and digitalization, of course, there are a lot of things that you can think of, and some might be well received then by our end consumers. Because when you look at the new generation, I have 2 kids and they are on the smartphone. More or less, life happens on smartphones. And that also poses a lot of pressure on companies, because you have to react to those customer wishes and think about how do you sell, how do you operate, how do you produce your appliances, and there we will see a lot of changes. And by the way, when you look forward, I always like to look back, you know, what was 10 years ago. And when you think of the smartphone, I think the iPhone emerged in 2007. That's not so long ago. So we also might see the one or the other technological shift within the white goods sector. So that might also be probable.
Well, I mean, we as a university, we've kind of also recognized this kind of changing customer preferences. So if I look at the students now in the chat here, I think that's something we see ourselves. Now, I was struck by one thing in your talk, and that was when you presented your new products and also the ideas where they're coming from. A lot of these ideas were developed in collaboration with external partners. So just, I don't know how common it is, but it struck me a little bit when I was listening to you. So how important are these collaborations for you right now and for your innovation processes, and how have they increased also maybe over the past decade?
I think when you look at our core products, we are extremely well positioned because when you ask about the washing process and so on, we do have a lot of experts that know a lot about the washing process, but that's not enough. You mean, you can look at the products as the things we can do well, but others can add value. Like detergent, we have the competence also to do detergent, but of course we don't do it by ourselves. We do it with a partner, so it's a joint development. And there we can add the competence of another partner, which is great because that also advances our expertise, so we come to a better solution. And of course, the partner also learns a lot about the washing process. How can we do things a little bit differently or improve things? And that's super interesting. And the more open you are to integrate new ideas, that's also great for the development people, because then they can also think of different solutions for the customer. And just to give you one example, not necessarily everything which we think is suitable and good for the German market works in the US, works in Singapore, or works in Australia. So we do have different customers in different parts of the world, and we have to really make sure that we hit the needs of those customers. And sometimes it's great also to partner with companies that are not in Europe or not in Germany, because then you get the insight of other markets within, or you get it integrated into your company, which is great.
Before we come to the open Q&A, and I've already seen the first people posting within the chat, just one more question, and that is one of the things that I read about Miele and that we also discussed before this talk is this Einmal Miele, immer Miele, right? So they're once Miele, always Miele, right? So there's a strong bond between your company and your employees, right? So there are people working more than 50 years for your business. Now, we do have some people potentially interested in joining you in the future. And I'm always trying to push my students that there's a life outside of consultancy and all of this. Why should they come join Miele? What's great at working for you? I mean, why are there people working for 50 years for you? And what do you offer in a sense to the next gen?
There's a short and a longer answer. The short would be people like to work at Miele. That would be the super short one. Now, I'm not only sitting here as Markus Miele and a representative of a family company, but you know, also in general, family companies, we have a lot of really, really well-performing family companies in Germany that think long-term and that actually have a long-term strategy. And that's great when you can contribute to a long-term strategy. And I always remember that story of one of the development engineers saying, you know, I was super happy the first time I was on vacation and saw my products working in the rented home I went to. So he said, you know, I knew the product because I developed it and now it is used, and that's great. So this is super interesting to see that people can connect to the products and can connect to the long-term strategy and like to work for a very long term. And you're absolutely right. We have people that are working 50 years for Miele, because we have 2 occasions per year where we honor the people that are 25, 40, or even 50 years with Miele. So we personally say thank you very much.